Most everyone here knows me, but if you don't, my name's Dan Peterman. Hi, Dan. Hi, Jim. I was born October 23rd, 19. I was born in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. I was the second child of 7. There was I had 3 brothers, 3 sisters. Around 2nd grade, we moved to Brookville, and that's where I went to high school. But when I was growing up, my father was actually an ordained minister, but he was very frustrated with life, is the way I'll put it. And there was a lot of strife at home, a lot of abuse, neglect, stuff like that. When I was 13, I ran away from home. I ran to a friend's house, and I can remember I was there for 4 days before there were phone calls made to find out where I was. And I'll never forget this. I remember talking to my mom on that 4th day. She said, "Well, maybe you're better off there." And as a young man, even though I really didn't want to go home, I had left. I wanted to feel like they wanted me to be there. So I lived with them for a while. They ended up moving to Tennessee, and I didn't want to move to Tennessee, apparently. I don't remember all the details, but I ended up moving to Philadelphia with an aunt and uncle for a little while. I stayed there. That didn't work out, so I ended up a ward of a court and ended up in a foster home back in the Brookville area, where I finished, I think, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade of high school. And then at the age of 20, I left for the Navy. Now, in between the time I graduated high school and leaving for the Navy, I discovered not only did I really enjoy alcohol, but I really enjoyed female company too. So that became my God, was drinking and women. And so for the next several years, that's how I lived my life. There's times in the Navy where I would show up to muster, and I would have my work center supervisor say, "You stand in the back, and as soon as this is over, you get in the vehicle. I'm taking you here. We're going to lock you up until you sleep this off." And I went for years like that. I ended up losing a federal job over drinking. So alcohol and womanizing, I guess, is what was my path in life. In November of 2005, I was in North Carolina, and I was debating whether I was going to say this, but the kids are gone. So I was living in North Carolina with my best friend's wife and feeling like I was doing the right thing, but I was still trying not to drink. I was struggling. I was trying to quit. That wasn't working. And so one night after church, I started going to church. I had way too much to drink. We had some friends over, and I ended up, that night I had her pinned to the floor and had her by the throat. The next morning I called the pastor of the church and said, I messed up now. And he said, "Do you think God can fix this?" And I said, "No, I don't." I said, "I don't." Well, he said, "Will you come to the church?" So I went to the church, and I accepted Christ that day. 2 weeks later, she left me down there, and some situations, I ended up coming back up here. And that's not the main thrust of what I want to tell you. That's my testimony. That's to get me to know me a little bit. But what I want to talk about was more the relationship with my parents. Because from the time I was little and had, real little, I started developing resentment, anger, hurt towards my parents. And I didn't realize until even after I was saved, how much of a hatred and a wall that I had built up there. And in March of 2008, my younger sister put a shotgun to her chest and pulled the trigger. So I ended up in the UPMC Presby waiting room for their intensive care unit. She was in there for 33 days. Partway through the first week, my sister Tina and I were handling everything. We were the oldest siblings there, and it was a mess. She should have died several times. And I got a call that my parents were coming from Philly. And I can remember the feeling in my stomach was, oh, great. Here comes the horse and pony show. Here they come. They're going to be the mom and the dad, and they're going to try to take over. And my sister and I are doing a great job. We don't need them here. And so I remember my friend Mike called. He was going to come visit and pray over my sister. And I told him the story about my father and mother coming. And my dad had turned into a hugger. And I don't know how many people know huggers, but if you want the hug, it's awesome. If you don't, so I was talking to Mike, and I said, my dad's going to come in here, he's going to hug me. I'm a man. He can shake my hand. And so he let me talk, and we finished the conversation, and he said, Dan, he said, you do what you want, he said, but just think about this. He said, when your dad gets there, he's going to come in. It's his little girl back there on that bed. He said, he knows he messed up with you guys as kids, so he probably has a lot of guilt. He said, so if he tries to hug you or wants to hug you, try looking at it like you're giving him something he needs instead of him taking something from you that you don't want to give. That was some very powerful words to me, and I was mad at him for saying, I'm like, yeah, whatever, Mike, I got to go. But I remember that chewing on that, and when my parents got there, my mom was in a wheelchair, and they come off the elevator, and my dad comes towards me, and I'm like, okay, here, what's going to happen here? And he walked up to me like this. He put his hand out to shake my hand, and I hugged him. Yeah. But that was just the beginning of it, because what God was revealing to me was, and at this point in my life, in my Christian walk, it was about 2.5 to 3 years into my Christian walk, I was just doing this. I wasn't doing this, or this like most of us do. But God was revealing to me that one of the biggest blockages in my walk with Christ was my unforgiveness. And I sat there in that waiting room, because you're only allowed in an hour here or an hour there to see them when they're in ICU like that. And I sat in that waiting room and I watched my dad minister to families. Watched him minister to families whose loved ones, some of them didn't even leave there. And God was taking the blinders off my eyes to the hate and the anger and the resentment that I had left there, because I had blocked out seeing who my dad really had become. And it was holding me back. So one day, I sat there and I said, Dad, can we go to lunch? So we went, he said, well, I'll get your mom. I'm like, no, just me and you. So we went upstairs or downstairs to the cafeteria. We got a kind of a quiet place together, and I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, I said, growing up, if you were a Christian, I didn't want to be one. And that's how I lived for 35, 36 years of my life. But I was wrong. And I said, Dad, I want God to take everything that's come between us, because I need my dad. And we're both sitting there bawling, and I just prayed. We prayed together, and I just asked God to take all of the past hurt, all of the past pain, abuse, everything that I was hanging on to and that I was putting up as my wall. I asked him to take it. And guess what he did? And I had to ask my dad's forgiveness right there too, because I had gotten to the point where I was the one that was sinning against him and against God. The whole point of this is there's one of the biggest blocks in my Christian walk has been unforgiveness, and it's gotten to the point sometimes that I'm completely stagnant or sinning myself. So where do I go to? I don't have a lot of scripture. I have one simple scripture. It's Luke 23, 33, and 34. When they came to a place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. When I ever wonder if I should forgive somebody, whether they're asking me for forgiveness or not, and I'm not saying I do this perfect all the time, but especially someone that's hurt you so deeply that you're not even seeing who they really are anymore. They were hanging him on the cross. For a completely innocent man was going to die on the cross for my sins. And he asked the Father to forgive them. and he's forgiven me of everything I've ever done. So I guess the point of this testimony is that I became a Christian in 2005, but I didn't really start a deeper walk with Christ until after that big obstacle, that big wall of unforgiveness was taken down in my life. So I thank you for your time. I hope not too many people are sleeping. And I'll turn it over to a real speaker.